Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm as always your host, Brody Robertson, and today we have a name who has been in the Linux world for a very, very long time. You've probably heard of him from one of the projects he's been involved in, whether that was the creation of Budgie, whether that's from Solus, whether that's from Clear Linux, or now the latest thing you're working on, Serpent OS. Welcome to the show. How about you introduce yourself and, say a bit about yourself, what you do?
I'm Ikey Doherty, as some of you may know from some of those projects mentioned. I think I'm probably the #1 serial distro hopper on the planet at this point. So I think I could put a few subreddits to shame.
Yeah, that's whenever I go and look up the history of someone, whether it's you or anyone else, you'll run into people that have, especially people who are known, they'll have opinions of you or of anyone else out there. And the thing that I commonly ran across is you like to start projects and then at some point you disappear and another project starts. And I don't know how you feel about that and your stance on it, but that seems to be the public perception of what you've done.
Yeah, I gotta admit that one is always a little bit, shall we say, irksome. I don't know if you have swearing on your channel, but
go right ahead. Yeah, it's totally fine.
So
anything, just don't say anything you don't want a recording of. That's anything else is fine.
Nah, my job's over, man. We're good. So, yeah, I mean, it's quite easy to say that someone's had a few projects, therefore, abandonment and whatever. But the way it's portrayed really plays it plays like some daddy issue trauma that I've inflicted upon the world. I mean, in reality, if you look how long I was in, say, for an example, Solus, I was in there for a good number of years. While I'm not going to go into the specifics of leaving whatever, I'm sure people can use their own brains there. That said, it's also not recognised much. The myself and others within the former and current Solus team and Serpent team were the ones who actually rescued Solus when they had the great downtime. We used the Serpent infrastructure to bring it back online, give them a strategy for getting everything back online. So people can probably figure out from that if there was perhaps any unresolved variables that at that point they were resolved. I mean, as for the whole the timeline, what people always get confused is, but he had Evolve OS and then he had Solus and then he had the other version of Solus and then it was Clear Linux, and so Clear Linux was a job. Sorry to break it, you guys. I worked for Intel. They paid me for a while. I left.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I did enjoy doing some of the cool stuff there, but at the end of the day, lads, it was a job. Man's got to get fed. That's all it fucking comes down to. I was taking a paycheck.
If you want to put it another way, no one will get angry at whoever started Rel when they left Red Hat. That, it's the same sort of thing.
How dare you? Loyalty. Yeah, come on. There's no friendship in money. Sorry, but that's just nature of it. But yeah, a very, very compacted history of the whole Solus thing. Years ago, many moons ago, as I've been reminded of, I'm fucking ancient.
Do you remember what year it was? Do you want to say what year it was, if you want to think about it?
I'm going to go within the year of our Lord, for starters. So recent-ish. So yeah, it started out originally as this whole Debian thing, because I started out years ago when I first was publicly involved with distros. I was involved in Linux Mint and helped them bring Linux Mint Debian edition into the world. This is, again, chronically years ago. But I always felt that there was a different way they could do it, and that's what led to the original birth of Solus OS back in the day. Then there was a version 2 because originally we had the PAE version. Oh yeah, it was i386 and PAE version, and then we was looking at actual AMD 64 bits. So between those two builds, we had from Debian stable, we had a diff of I think 7,200 packages on top of Debian stable to maintain. On top of, sorry, did I mention stable? and it shat the bed every time he looked at it. So I couldn't deal with it. Like, that was not the life for me anymore. So we went on to the whole like Solus West 2, and that's how I came across the, I'm gonna say, PySci package manager. Well, let's all admit we're reading it. Yeah, we're all reading it as pissy. Let's be honest. Like,
How do you spell it?
PISI. Yeah, package is installed successfully as intended, or something like that. I don't know.
Okay.
I renamed it eventually. But yeah, it was at the time it was like light years ahead of everything else. It was greatly influenced by Gen 2. It was from the Paradise Linux project, but obviously Paradise, they lost all their funding because government changes, blah blah blah. So I was like, okay, let's use this package manager, and wouldn't it just be easier if we built this thing from scratch? I said nobody ever. I did. I figured it had to be easier to maintain it than having to curse at somebody breaking the packages that I was dependent on.
Right.
So that's how we led down that. But there was a slight little schism in the community when I said, we're going to go independent, we'll do everything great. I mean, back then we had, like glossy 3D graphics on the website. There was bright blue here, silver there, and, pictures of actual boxes with the Solus OS logo on it, because it worked out of the box. Like pre-Amazon marketing.
If I went to archive.org, do you know what year I could go to see that?
Oh God, it's got to be early 2010s, isn't it? 12, 13, somewhere around there.
Did the domain ever change?
It was solusos.com.
Okay.
Back in the day, it was kind of pretty looking for a website at that point. Another story, when after we accepted that website, somebody uploaded a PHP shell, but like that was not. So it came with a price. But yeah, so the community was completely fragmented because I wanted to change it. Like, this should have been the first sign back then. Run. There was a big great battle ensued, and the Debianizers didn't want to go against the independents, and familiar story. In the end, it got so utterly toxic, I had to basically terminate the project. I was like, nah, headshot, goodbye. But I always wanted to continue in that line of work, and that's how it was eventually reborn as Evolve OS. But in between all of this, in between all of these efforts, we had the advent of the Budgie desktop, which, to be fair to versions 2 and 3, was basically poor man's Chrome OS, like, with popovers. And that was originally slated to be based on Tumbleweed, I think it was back then.
Okay.
Like, I wasn't gonna do the distro thing ever again. Familiar story though. I don't learn. If you know of somebody suffering with addiction.
Hey, look, at least if you didn't enjoy it, maybe you would stop. I don't know. I assume at least you enjoy the distro thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was going well for a while, and then it's like, do you know what? There was this great big body of work that we done for Solus OS 2. It felt a real shame to, like, chuck it all in the bin. So it's like, do you know what? I'm going to bring it back, and I'm going to come up with a new name for it, something really awesome. Evolve OS. Looking back, it wasn't entirely fucking creative, but that's what we went with. That lasted for a little while, and then I got a letter. I was living in the UK then as well. I'm back here now, that's why I'm full of bad luck. But anyway, I got a letter. It was signed William Hague, Secretary of State. I thought this would be fucking brilliant on it. I opened it up for use of the trademarks OS.
What?
Is that hold the fucking phone here? Did you not just take a lot of backhanders, getting a load of iOS devices and Chrome OS devices in through the House of Parliament, and you're on about me for getting a distro? I'm still pissed off about it now. This was like years ago, but literally raging. So I thought, right, I've got to fix this. We're going to come up with like a strategy where we're not going to get sued to shit, because that's the way it was looking. It was an immediate cease and desist. It's like, it's a fucking niche distro. What do you want me to do? Like, all €7 fucking euros of income. All right, we'll sacrifice that. So I come up with a strategy. It's like, it was motivated entirely by being pissed off. So I was like, we're going to call it the Solus Project.
So you went from Solus to evolve
OS.
to Solus. Oh yeah, evolve OS to Solus project.
However, this
Okay.
is my thinking at the time. This is like, fuck you, William. I've got this figured, right?
Okay.
Go on, Billy Boy. I've got this worked out. So said it was going to be the Solus operating system created by the Solus project, and it will not be my fault if anyone decides to abbreviate it to Solus OS. And that's literally what it did. Just to be an arsehole. That's why it got renamed back to there. Just literally as a middle finger to the UK government.
That's wild that they'll come after you for the term OS. Like that,
Yeah,
it's such a generic term.
Well, as it turns out, as we now know, so I won't be get done for misrepresentation, it stands for Ordnance Survey. So it's a royal trademark, 300 years or so old. And yeah, I mean, it explains how they found me, really. You know, they're fucking map makers. Should have seen that one coming. But yeah, that's why they were renamed. So we had the same project that was just renamed in place for spite. Because there was also a game at the time called Evolve. And everyone was writing on the Steam and said, hey, you know, there's already a distro called this. And then, like, I had back chats with, like, the developers, and it was all like, nobody gives a shit. So we all just agreed that we're fine with it. Yeah, and then it just became Solus. But, I mean, that's 3 distros, that's basically one. There was a dismissal of the first project, and then it was reborn. So only the first one was shot in the face. The second one was just a very, very confused name and story, but there was still, that continuation. And then, eventually, many moons later, I was working for Intel. We did the whole Clear Linux thing. Apparently, that's still around, I hear. So
apparently.
Yeah, I haven't really checked in on it, to be honest. I think like Cashy OS is stealing all the news, to be honest with you.
You do not know how many people bug me about that distro. Jesus Christ.
So have you used their kernel?
Apparently it's good. That's what I keep hearing.
That's what I say. I've seen a lot of the stuff and I've seen some of the results. It looks interesting, but for me, I think over the years I've got more down the tooling and the nitty gritties of what makes a distro, so I don't get to use them. As I explained to you earlier on, I went to plug in the microphone that's been packed in a bag for the last 2.5 years, and I forgot to have the drivers in the kernel, so I optimized the microphone away.
Hey,
that's like x86 V7 plus star.
No one can break into your system and listen to your mic if there's no driver for it. It's a security feature.
There you go. Secure moot.
Yeah. Anyway, from Clear Linux, when did the idea for Serpent come around?
Yeah, so Clear Linux was sort of parallel to the Solus stuff, and then
a
few years ago, like I took my leave, whatever. Me being great with naming things, obviously. It started because I was creating a game engine with D. And at some point, as you do, right? It was called. I love the company name though. It was called Lispy Snake, right? But that was originally because I was getting really pissed off because every time I went onto LinkedIn, right? Because sometimes you have to go onto LinkedIn. Our client would like you to work with them. They have their Series B funding. They have this great AI effort and blah blah blah, and then it turns out to be some bottlenecks that's in Python. It's like, nah, unicorn company. They've made a lot of mistakes, and I've got to come in as the janitor. Fuck off. So that's what I was getting constantly. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna like create a kick in the face firm. Just like as everything, my name is always a middle finger. But yeah, so Lispy Snake was a middle finger to all the Python consultancy gigs. Fast forward a little bit, was making the game engine with it, and then I got really irritated because I wanted to be able to build for every platform. It was fine building for my current version of Linux, but then once you get into cross-compiling from Linux to Windows, just on Linux, at that point I was like, there's got to be a better solution for dealing with the toolchain. So it's like, why don't I create a small, instead of reproducible scripts and About 3 weeks in, I was going, fuck, I've created a distro. So it was literally a complete accident. I created like this miniaturized, at the time it was like muzzle, whatever. And that I could intrude into it and I was like, I fucked up. So yeah,
Unleash the beast again.
Yeah, snake in the garden. So yeah, reused the logo because I couldn't get anyone to make a logo for anything. And I was like, Serpent OS. And now I've endured the last, is it nearly 5 years? People say, but why the name?
Well, now you know.
Laziness and spite.
So it came around about 2020-ish then, 2019, somewhere in that range?
Around then, yeah.
Okay.
We had a few ideas at then, and me being me, I had a few opinions. I didn't need to share them all, but I did. But some of them didn't make sense at first, and unfortunately, kind of drew an interesting crowd. So it turns out when you tell people that you're not going to use GNU-C library, and that you're going to use a certain approach to things, at that point it's like, you should replace systemd as well. Yeah, and while I'm at it, I'm also going to reject Wayland, and I'm going to like put Xorg into the kernel, because that will solve the world's problems. Yeah, so there was a slight pivot, as they say. It all involves pointing fingers, really, when you really think about it. But yeah, it started off with a set of ideas that's come from being jaded from doing distro dev for way too many years. And that's kind of what it started out about. It's like, how do we fix the deployment of Linux distributions rather than just let's build another distro because fuck it, why not? They haven't
there's plenty of those.
Yeah, like Justin Bieber's had his share of the limelight, but there's others yet.
Well, there's
we can have
Bieber
more
OS
distros. Yeah, and there was like Hannah Montana Linux as well, wasn't there? Yeah, there was a few, but I'm sure we could slap Hyperland on a few of those now, couldn't we?
Surely.
Get some nice blur behind going. Oh yeah, who needs stars when you have blur?
Well, fun fact, I don't know if you know this one, but one of the first distros to ship Wayland was Rebecca Black OS.
Oh, I'm in the wrong industry. I can't go up anymore. Between me and my non-working microphone. Yeah, so I decided finally I was going to address all of the tooling issues, and I kind of looked at the way that I'd approached distros before, and I realised the approach and mentality was wrong. I was always trying to solve the deployed problem itself, where like I was always thinking, how is the user going to engage with this? That does matter, of course it does.
Sure.
Nobody wants to use something that's complete shit. But it was always entirely around the UX, and the tooling side always suffered, and it was always having to put out fires to fix even the most trivial of architectural issues. And one of the things that really, really irritated me is the lack of nice atomic updates in basically anything. And when I started looking around, like, say, well, OS Street was the primary example, because nothing else really existed a few years ago. Something really triggered me about having to reboot. And I get that if you're installing a kernel update, fair enough. You know, there's a new C or NSS libraries they've updated, fair enough. You know, like they're in memory, anything's residual needs the entire reboot. Totally get that. If I'm installing a text editor and you want me to reboot, fuck off. Basically, that's my entire take on it. Like, I shouldn't have to. It just seems a chronic pain in the arse to do that. And I get it. It makes sense in more of an appliance point of view. Totally understand that. And there's a difference in context as well, because other projects have been... They're interested in having an immutable, verifiable image. And for that, there ain't many options. So, makes sense. But as a desktop user, as somebody who's doing the development work, for me, it felt not just OS3. There's other examples as well. They all have the same idea, you know, like it's an A/B swap up boot. That's all it is. Whether it's for partitions, volume groups, or as I'm sure somebody's going to tell me, Butterfly subvolumes, you know, with compression, and you know, like I can't stand Butterfly. I just can't.
If you want to talk about that, I'd definitely like to hear it at some point. You don't have to sidetrack right now. I can put it on the list. We can talk about it later if you want to.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I don't do the whole fad thing. I don't.
Fair.
I used EXT up until about 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and before that, I used the other file system that's dead. Anyway, one foot in the grave. Moving on. So, I thought I'd focus on a different problem from immutable. I thought the problem that matters to me is atomic.
Right.
And the reason that matters for me is because having done the whole distro engineering thing, there's so many things that are going to change over time. Mutating a live file system just is not a solution. I mean, we've all seen it, even with really good package managers. Once you start using pip against your user tree, forget about it.
Yeah.
It just don't matter anymore. Any package manager is break. Why is this file have a directory?
This is why a couple of years ago there was a PEP to basically force you to use a virtual environment by default. Like, if you're gonna do Python, just do it in a virtual environment. Do not let it touch your system, like your core system.
Yeah. So that's sort of the problem that I was coming from. Having to stat a file to know the status of the operating system kind of seemed a bit silly to me. The whole, and it's not me joining, you know, the anti-Unix camp, but we've done this whole, that's the file system and everything is a file for so long that we've just accepted that the operating system is a database of files on disk, and we've left it at that. We've added more features to the file system to account for that, and I kind of felt a bit... File system's great, don't get me wrong, but I thought, surely we can go back to basics here and think about using actual databases and the right structures and using things like hard links. And so that's kind of where Moss came about. And if you're wondering where the name came from, it was the whole a Rolling Stone blah blah, because we could be rolling distro, and that has to be Boulder, Avalanche, Summit. That's where all of those names come from. Decided it's going to be rolling release, and it's going to be different to everyone, of course. So we set about doing an atomic implementation that would not require a reboot, and took a bit of experimentation. At first, we used a symlink, and that every time that was decoded, that mangled all the paths. And I kind of left us with a security issue. If you built something and that resolved to one particular symlink, and that was in that build configuration, you could abuse that to inject a path that didn't exist. I was like, fuck, that's not going to do. So we had a rethink on it. And then the current strategy for applying the file system, long story short, we create a hard link farm. It's the same as any other content addressable storage. You have a load of hashed files stuck in a directory somewhere, and then you just hard link them into place. The difference is, when we put that staging directory together, we're basically creating a new version of the user tree. Because we've enforced the user merge from the start, which meant we had an advantage. We didn't have to solve that problem. We know that everything is related to user. All of the symlinks in root, they go straight into user. So I thought, why don't we just swap user? That would seem to be the obvious thing to do, which we do now. So we use the rename at 2 syscall using the atomic exchange flag. It's over the website. Everyone looks at it and go, fuck is he even on about? Long story short, it is like everyone's looking at the website, but Serpent, I don't know, Adam and Eve. Nothing to do with Linux, apparently. But it will atomically exchange 2 directories in place. And that doesn't affect running processes. You will not get a busy error. You won't get bad file descriptors. The view that they saw of user at the time of execution is what they still see. So it means any new application launch will see the new user. You don't have to read, which is wonderful, fantastic. And that is, in a nutshell, how Moss works at the moment. There are certain downsides to that. performance. Never did I think ext4 would have a performance issue with this, but it turns out, oh faithful, we were creating an extremely inappropriate number of hard links, to be quite honest with you. The maximum hard links to a file is 65k on ext4. Which, even if you think about it, does kind of sound a little bit low, if we're honest. You can have millions of hard links, but one file can only be hard linked up to 65,000 times.
Right.
Because somebody decided to use a 16-bit unsigned integer, not a larger number. When will we get the storage types right for times, dates, sizes, anything? Anyway.
Yeah, eventually. As we keep we identify problems and then we address them over time. And one day...
Yeah, in 2039, maybe. We'll do it then.
It's better than nothing.
So, yeah, we discovered a bug a few weeks back where it was really irritating because the uniqueness of this was the weirdest part. So everything in our content addressable storage is based on the 128-bit XX hash. We chose it because it was just fast as all fuck and it seemed appropriate, and it was like Z standard, yeah, just whack them all in. Multi-threading, yeah. 4 progress bars, fuck it, crack on. We stuck all the shiny in Rust as well, why not? Memory safety everywhere's. It downloads extra memory safeties off the internet for you and just sticks them in your extra memory safety sticks. Because that's how it works, right?
Never looked.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. So we have like all these hashes, and it turns out when we're building the packages and we build these stone archives, which I'll get to the format in a minute, we didn't account for when a file would be empty.
Okay.
So it's quite happily accepting 0-byte files. That's fine. It takes up no extra storage on disk.
Sure.
It takes up no extra storage in the archive itself, and that's fine. But funnily enough, doesn't matter how many times you hash an empty file, it's going to have the same fucking hash. This is where the problem came out. Yes. Do you know all of those init.py and pyc files in Python, and all the config files that are part of the kernel? They're all empty files. So when you have a new transaction, and then you're recreating all of those files again, and then you've got thousands of empty files in one transaction, then you install another one. That's what we call an exponential fuck-up. So within about 30 transactions, the system was like, no. We'd run out of file descriptors for hard links. So we created a workaround for it, which is basically like, if we see the known bad hash, then we'll just create a new empty file rather than hard link it, sorted. But that led us down this whole rabbit hole of, you would use MOS, you would install a package, and it would be excruciatingly slow, just for the first time. You'd run it again, it'd be extremely freakishly quick. And nobody could figure it out, because the profile information was basically identical every single time. Except for sometimes, the ext4 call trace for find extents took ages, and sometimes it didn't. Turns out, even though you're using hard links and we're using all the relative APIs to do so, like linkat and make their at, it still has to go and find the hard links in the cache. And it primes that cache, it knows where they are, even though they're relatively linked. Anyway, that's just how it works, and I'm not going to insult it, but we do now default to FS. Because going from 30 seconds to 1.6 is a little bit better.
Definitely an improvement.
On an i9.
Yeah, that's a bit of an improvement.
Yeah. On an i9 with a terabyte NVMe SSD, it went from 30 seconds. So yeah, as I say, it's been a huge rabbit hole, but one of the next things we're looking at is actually using, instead of blitting millions of bajillions of bajillions of files, because we have a working Atomic app implementation, which is really, really nice, was like, well, we probably want immutable now as well, but in a way that's actually useful to everyone without cutting off the developer experience, like having that nice compromise. So we kind of looked at what the Compose of S guys are doing over there, And then we realized with the way that MOS works at the moment, in that it has databases for the entire system state. That's why sometimes we call it system state manager rather than package manager. So we have a database that's basically, if you imagine a stone file or an archive, it's split into several components. They're top level payloads. Each one has a fixed header, so we can just skip through the file really, really easily. But you have your metadata payload, which, as you can imagine, is just a bunch of keys with their types and their values. That's simple enough, like dependency, name, version release, whatever. That stuff's boring. But then we have a layout payload, which defines how the file system is represented on disk when produced.
Oh. We lose him? Is that my side? Who disconnected there? I love Discord. What a great tool this is. Oh, wait, maybe it's my side? Oh! I'm 5,000 milliseconds ping. Maybe that's my side, actually. Oh! Hello?
Hello?
I don't know. I was at 5,000 milliseconds ping. I don't know what happened there. That was... Yeah.
It was probably my verbal wall of text. It just slammed your network. Yeah, so the layout payload is representation of the file system, not the actual contained file system. Because that seemed to me to be the issue with pretty much most formats. They're basically a glorified tarball.
Right.
You can't diff a tarball realistically unless you're doing a binary diff, or, you know. So we have this layout payload which defines how they're going to be done. Then you have an index payload which is effectively a set of offsets keyed by the hash. And then we have the content payload, which at the moment is what we just unofficially we call a mega blob. It's every unique file whacked together and then compressed in one go with Z standard. So that's then reflected at a higher level within the database. So we have a system installation database which caches all of the metadata. We have the layout database as well. So you can imagine you have these various databases which all work together. So then when we emulate updating the system, because we have to create an entirely new state. So we're not upgrading the system. We don't know what the file system looked like anymore. We have to completely reproduce that view. So inside, it's not actually imperative. We had to pretend that it was. I know some people are drawing comparisons to certain other toolings, but it's not quite the same. But yeah, it's a pretendy imperative distro, if that makes sense. So we join a lot of queries together and we can produce this whole new file system in one go. And at the moment, as I said, we can do that now like in under a couple of seconds, like say 250,000 hard links. There's some code up there for creating a virtual file system in memory, which then optimizes the order. It uses the arena create. So what it basically does is it rearranges where all of the files are going to go based on symlink resolution ahead of time to know what the conflicts will be. And then it writes them all in a file system optimized order using the relative APIs. It's pretty, but it basically translates to fast as fuck, which is what we want. So now we have all this working system and we have this deduplication stuff. We have these individual transactions. We decided take what we have now, and instead of writing out a new hard link tree, we could actually just write out I don't know the pronunciation, EROFS, the EROFS, the one that ComposerFS guys are looking at. So long story short, it's a read-only file system. That's all it's good for. You can only read with it, but it's optimized for read, and that's the key here. But it's been improved by the ComposerFS guys to work in conjunction with OverlayFS. Now, normally, I'm not a great fan of OverlayFS because it has some chronic performance issues when you have a separation between the bottom and upper layer, right? It's fucking hell on earth. However, we've come up with a slightly novel way of mingling our approach and their approach. Instead of writing out the hard link tree, we'll write out the metadata only EROFS file. We'll set all of the trusted redirects as the metadata back to the underlying storage in the overlay. So at the very bottom layer, you've got like my actual real disk. Yeah. And then all of the content store would still be in that disk there at this bottom layer. Then we'd have a pretend abstraction of the file system in EROFS. And through overlayFS, it would represent a fake file system of the underlying view through that. But the thing is, instead of having to compute everything and it being really expensive, we already have this database there. So we can just spit out this file. And that tells overlayFS to redirect everything to the lower layer, to the lower levels. And then you basically get the free immutable support. So instead of having to remount everything and everything like that, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to do something called a behind mount. You've probably heard of those lately.
No, I've not heard of that term actually.
They used to call them mount tucking or something like that. Was one of the names for it. It was a very informal idea, but the basic premise is instead of us having to remount and reboot the entire system, we're still going to use the EuroFS stuff the way that the ComposeFS guys have been doing it, except for we don't have to compile it against the tree. We already have the data to generate it in place. We can just spit out the EuroFS file, no problem. Then, I forgot what I was saying there. Confusion's not there. No, completely gone. Like the EuroFS, spit it to disk. We bring up a new set of mounts in the mount stack. So say you've got like your existing user mount that was prepared in during the init. That's this existing overlayFS with the initially writable lower layer, but then the user tree and forced user merge make that all read-only immutable. But what we will do is create a new set of mounts, the same set of mounts, but for the new transaction behind that. So you've got this one set of mount, and you've got a higher set of mounts in the mount stack. So then when you pop it, the new one is here, that one's gone, and you haven't violated the root namespaces all the way through the tree. So you still get that live swap. You still get the very, very fast blitz. You still get atomics. You still get immutable, all mixed up in one package. So that's the next steps of it, which is going to be kind of cool to be honest with you. So a modular, immutable atomic.
I'm trying to keep up with what you're saying here. I feel like SerpertOS would do a really good job with having like a 2-hour essay video just explaining how this system works. Because I think the short description you have there, I can understand why people are kind of confused, because it sounds, because atomic has now become kind of the term for things like silver blue and things like that as well. A lot of people are kind of confused, like, how is this different from an OS tree distro? Like, isn't this just the exact same thing? Yeah.
Yeah, that is kind of the problem at the moment. Everyone jumped on the bandwagon, said, we're atomic, when they meant we're immutable. And now that's kind of the key difference. They went for immutable first, we went for atomic first. That's why it took us 5 years, and they've got like great marketing campaigns at the moment. It's taken us a lot fucking longer. But now we're approaching the whole, can we do immutable, can we make it work efficiently side of things. So to make ours atomic first without the immutable side, that kind of meant we still had to emulate that imperative behavior. Like, I install a package, it's there, I apply updates, it's done in real time. That's what we needed to make it work first. And that was kind of hard, and that we needed to create a new format for that, and we needed to make sure that we could survive over time with upgrades, or if the container format changed in any way, or if we added any new features, we had to make sure that this thing could basically update for the rest of the time. So there's versioning in the header itself, and each individual payload has versioning as well. And we're going to be doing what they call epoch bumps. So effectively, you'll only update to the latest supported version of the repository, and then at that point, you will see no more updates until you're on the new version of it, and then keep going.
Right.
So yeah, it is different from OS3 deployments, and that the idea is to present what, to all intents and purposes, is a classic Linux distribution, which is composable and currently mutable, but using all the new tricks, which is, like have it atomic and have content addressable storage, have offline rollbacks and things like that. So that was the hard part, to be honest with you.
Right, because one of the problems I see with these, it's not just OS tree, it's with a lot of the other approaches as well. There are these weird distros where if you're someone who only lives in a web browser, totally fine. And if you're someone who is really, really advanced with Linux, you can generate your own custom images, and it's great for you. But for those people in the middle,
Cloud native.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. But yeah, for those people.
Why is it on my desktop?
For those people in the middle who don't really know what they're doing, like I find it to be more confusing, and I get it for devices like the Steam Deck, where it's a appliance device. You can install just regular Linux on it, but it's just a gaming handheld console. And if you use it like that, great idea. But I just don't really ever
Sealed
see.
Delivery.
Sorry?
The sealed delivery, task specific.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. It's basically OTA.
The only way I see the current OS tree approach really working is the way they're trying to get it to work, which is going heavy down the, if you want to install applications, you'll be installing it through Flatpak, which I guess like it's an approach that seems to be working, but I don't know if it's going to. I just don't see it covering every use case. Like that's the main point there.
Yeah, I mean, Flatpak it does have its use. Like, it does make things easier. But if we're at the point where everyone is shoving everything into Flatpak, which the idea was, everyone really, really got upset by Canonical having their own store and this whole centralization strategy, which really was a way to build engagement with publishers and developers, really, because they wanted a centralized platform to work. So, I mean, that kind of helped with Flatpak. That and the technical underpinnings of Flatpak were obviously way ahead of Snap. But we're now at a point that using Flatpak means using FlatHub. Whatever way you look at it. So you are basically adding another 3 or 4 versions of this meta distro that exists on FlatHub through all of these packages. So the argument originally was, why should we package all these things? Because, we have our own distro. They should all be up in this magical cloud store type contraption, but it's basically another fucking distro now. I mean, if you really look at it, how many apps are packaged up, it's basically another distro.
From the developer perspective, like of the upstream application developer, I understand wanting to have a central location your application is distributed from, because if you have people who are reporting bugs and they're using the Flatpak, the dependencies they have, the version they are running, it makes your job considerably easier.
Yeah. Testing matrix, basically.
Yeah. But I can also see from the downstream perspective as well there, and I don't know, I use Flatpaks in some places, like my OBS right now is a Flatpak, and usually if the upstream developers have an official distribution and that is a Flatpak, usually that's what I'm going to go with. But I don't think it is the be-all and end-all solution.
No, you still kind of need to account for some level of distribution integration as well, because some distros do things differently, something weird. I mean, if you look at Serpent, we've got a mandate for things being stateless, running without configuration, and making sure we can roll back offline. And so some things in terms of the core experience have to be packaged up and managed by the package manager, and not using, say, like Butterfly snapshots and things like that, because then everything comes out of sync. But yeah, I can see arguments for and against. I think utilities and apps, sure, but I think the basics should all be provided for by the distro. So in terms of your productivity tools, your office suites, and it shouldn't be like having 40 of every single thing, but having 2 or 3 of each thing. So there's a little bit of choice, and those are well integrated and sensible and tested. Then yeah, but as for the wider ecosystem, got Flower. That's my view on it anyway. I don't want to go to Flatpak for Firefox or Thunderbird. I want to make sure they're deeply integrated by my distro, and know that they're working with the security configuration, and I haven't got to go online to do anything with it. Basic shit like that.
Sure. No, that's totally that's totally understandable. So Why do you... here's a question. Maybe you don't have an answer for this one, but why do you think there has been this focus on immutability first over the atomic updates from a lot of these other approaches? Like, why do you think the OS tree approach has become such a popular way of building some of these distros?
I would love to say that it was primarily technical reasons, but I don't really think it is. I think quite a bit of it has to do with the Octo story, industry sponsorships and politics. I think powered a lot of that success, if we're quite honest. Because there's a whole world trying to get away from the old bit-bake way of doing things. You know, and a few years ago there was a little bit of drama, and then you had like the gnome way of doing things, and that sort of took off with relevant sponsorship. It also makes sense, obviously, for Flatpak way of doing things, and I think it was something that was seen as technically more feasible to pull off.
Right.
Given the use cases in mind. I think I haven't read as much on it, but I think if anyone had looked at, say, what we was doing with Serpent and that, they would have said, this is going to require far too much upfront investment to pull off.
Well, you spent the last 20 minutes talking about how it works, so I think you might be right there.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to see results and your basic priority was, you know, like, here's our defined use cases, this is what corporates approve. We have a sealed delivery, verified updates, and that works, you know, like in terms of do we meet update safety? I think it tick all of those boxes. And I think Serpent's kind of in a weird one because everyone's going to say, well, we've already got OS tree, we kind of don't need it. And there's distro box and there's RPM OS tree and there's OCI and things like that. And I agree, all of those things do exist. And for a lot of people that might not want to use Serpent, that's also fair enough. But it's also about Serpent having the bottle to push forward with things where other people don't want to invest the resources because it doesn't see quick enough returns. And that's kind of where Serpent really. Because it's taken a lot of time to build all of the aspects of the tool. And say, for example, boot management without scripts. And that's the sort of things. Because some of our rules, say, like being stateless, so we can't force etc files to exist. There's no etc default grub. We have to pretend like we don't know where the bootloader or boot partition even exists. Okay. We're not allowed to remember it because it will go against status. So my install of Serpent, there's absolutely no file anywhere to tell MOS or any tool where the boot partition is. It's not allowed to know. So that becomes a hard problem to solve immediately. How the fuck do you find it? So that was one of the projects, BLS for me, which is bootloader specification for me. And because it's systemd related, it also is pronounced blasphemy. That's why, but you're not. So that's the core crate that we use at the moment. It's largely a successor to my early work with Clear Boot Manager. But the TLDR is given the proposed local system state that the contents of the boot and or ESP partitions should be entirely reproduced. That includes the bootloader itself, any configuration files, down to knowing what the command line configurations to pass to it are, what the topology of the disk is, if there's, you know, is there a UUID for Lux that needs passing in because you've got an encrypted container halfway between, and what's the partition UUID on GPT for that root disk, you know, all of this shit that's normally just encoded to a file, etc default grub or somewhere similar, and just saved across time and upgraded with a bash script. We've actually had to go a little bit further in, and if the variables are provided over EFI vars, then we can query them from systemd boot because, hey, you booted us, thank you. We'll still verify them because we're not taking your word for it. Then we'll query the topology of the root file system. So we'll basically walk back through the device tree and actually scan the first few bytes of every disk that we find to figure out what the superblock is and extract the UUIDs. And so we actually find out what every file system on the way up is, including if there's a Lux2 container, if there's any LVM2 stuff involved, if CXT4, XFS, the whole lot. We've actually got Rust-based superblock patches for all of those. And then, we write out all these configuration files, whack them all out, automatically discover the ESP. If we can't find it or we don't trust system deboot, which is also both two good policies, it will actually fall back to reading the partition table itself and then finding the tagged ESP and X bootloader using the UUIDs. So it's insane. If you was to propose this like at a company and say, this is the thing we're going to do. We're going to create a package manager that also knows how to do stuff with boot managers and find out what file system you're running. But it all allowed to have configuration files. Fuck off, you're fired. You can never propose it. So that's basically the gap that Serpent's filling. You know, like these long-term, how do we fix how we distribute Linux? How do we make it reproducible? Not in terms of the bit for bit byte stuff, you know, like build reproducible. Of course, that's important. That will come in time. But how can I have a definition of a system that I can reproduce on any given system and know that it's always going to turn out the right way?
Right.
That part is an interesting problem that I don't think there's much attention on. The attention so far has effectively been the immutable image. It's a sealed image. We know the difference between image A and image B. But when the user is composing those images in any given environment, how do you then know that those things are still going to work? And that's sort of where Serpent fits in. The weirdo.
So, whilst people have described what you do as like, jump between different things, I think a friendly way to describe it, and I have seen a couple of people say this, what you do is conduct a lot of OS research. And I think that's a really good way to look at what Serpent is. Like, this is... It may not be anywhere near ready, and it's been a work in progress for a long time, but this is researching a way of building a distro that hasn't really been that delved into.
Yeah, and the other thing we want to do is actually make it a bit of a family of distributions as well. That was one of the key tenets, because we've not really had many from scratch efforts that have taken off over the few years. I'm realizing that most of them were me. Awkward. But anyway, because we're getting the tooling as the main priority, because we're making sure that these things will keep updating over time. So like, if I switch it off for a year and then update it, is some weird configuration change going to affect how the scripts run? And, you know, like, I want to make sure I can deal with all those things that I feel comfortable running and other people feel running for as long as I need to. If they want to build their own variant of Serpent, or they want to build something completely new just using the Serpent tools, that's kind of what it is. This is basically... if you've ever wanted to build a distro and you go, I've got all these ideas and I'll put this thing together and that thing together and it's going to serve this use case, and then you realize the only tools available to you is basically fucking remaster sys to just respin somebody else's ISO, and then you're still using the exact same package management tools, the exact same configuration stuff. You still have to reproduce the fucking installer and everything again. Why has nobody done that for us already? So hello, this is where Serpent comes in. We are giving you a box and they go, now fuck off and make your distro. This is basically what it's about. So you have the freedom to make something, having the features and guarantees that exist more at the enterprise scale, but like any man distro level. So if the small shops and businesses need to roll an appliance, it's easy for them to do so. It's approachable. They have advanced tooling that supports all of the use cases. If they want to be able to bootstrap, we got the know-how, you know. So that's sort of where it comes in. It's, in a way, I guess it's kind of like a Robin Hood variant of tooling. You know, like we stole all this from the industry to give it to you. It kind of is that. Yeah, I mean, that's basically what it is. It's a new ecosystem. It's a new way of building distros. It's not... Any individual idea that we do is not new. It's not even remotely fucking novel. But putting them together like in a one-stop shop, that's the bit that actually matters, and making them so others will be able to use them. Because again, it's not just going to be Serpent OS. There's going to be other variants of Serpent. There's going to be downstreams. They're going to be very not Serpents as well, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, you make a point about like just making effectively a spin of things, and that's the reason I don't really talk about distros that much. Like, there are people who do these distro reviews on YouTube, and it's just like, yeah, but if I look at something that's Debian based, it's probably just gonna be some sort of Ubuntu-like flavor, or like technically Ubuntu has enough of a distinction from Debian to be its own base, but then, like, you know, you have your Arch-based systems, your Gentoo-based systems, your Fedora-based systems, and that, like, for the most part, that's pretty much what you get. Like, there are these little projects, but for the most part,
tastes and flavors.
Like, people have talked about, like, hey, would you rather use Arch Linux or Endeavour OS? Like, Endeavour is just Arch Linux with an install script. Like, that's all it is.
Yeah, it wouldn't get beyond, because it is like, and don't get me wrong, I'm not belittling the work that each distro does.
No, I'm some of them do. Like, and CashOS
solve an upstream issue.
Yeah. And CashOS, they, like, you know, they get a lot of praise for their kernel work. Like, that, yeah, absolutely. But, like, a lot of distros they're just not really doing anything.
They're variations of defaults.
Yeah.
And
that
there's
has
got to
value
be
for
other
some.
ways of doing that, right? Yeah. So that's an interesting little segue into something we're doing in Serpent. So remember I said earlier on, it's like, we pretend to be imperative. Now, that's not to say that we're entirely declarative, because what's in etc and var are basically your problem right now. They're yours. But a package in Serpent OS is not allowed to contain any other file than the user tree. It's literally unsupported. We will not allow Boulder to generate a package that does that. And implicitly, we've stripped the prefix from all paths, so that it has to be /user as the basis of all paths. It's impossible to install a package that contains anything other than user file. So we had to force the status. So that kind of means that anything that's in etc is basically, that is yours. We ain't touching it. There's no possibility for a conflict. If you want to reset your system, just delete it and reboot, and you're back to the way it came from default. Yeah. It's a little bit slightly more involved, but basically you generate a new transaction with MOS, and it would rerun any triggers, like running LD config and temp files. It would rerun all of those, but by and large, you could implement this as like a boot script, to be honest. You know, like it runs in the init RD, just wipes etc, boots again. One of the things that we have been exploring as we're going forward, we're like, we got this version of MOS, we got this version of the Stone format, we're quite happy with where they're at. We've already planned for the V2 stuff, which is like supporting FS Verity by encoding the digest, having multi-sig, and sorry, we're not doing SigStar, we're not OCI, not happening. It's just, some things are just ruthlessly applied where they're not relevant. And this is definitely a case of which it is literally is not relevant. We own our own binary encoded format. We can just transcribe a log into that. You know, we can just use the HMAC of the prior entry, and you know, it's not hard. We can have a ledger inside every single part. Anyway, what we're going to do next is have a system model.
Okay.
It's not our idea. If you think about when you're on Gentoo or anything like that, you have basically your model is defined as your file, which says this is world and this is what I'm having to include, and every time I do it, this is what gets added in, right? So we are going to do nothing like Gentoo. I just didn't name drop them. We're going to have a system configuration file or series of files, which will define what your model is supposed to be. So the basic idea, well, the basic problem that we've run into, even though we're emulating the imperative behavior, is still a proper pain in the hole, because as you're updating over time, you have to differentiate between what's allowed to stay installed and what needs to get pulled in. Which means you have to deal with, does the system provided version provide the dependency I'm already looking for, or is it provided in the repo? So you have a distinction which is corrosive, really. A good example of this was the Sting package that we have in Serpent. So we were doing some testing. This never got released to anyone except I saw it. We was originally using libarchives, BSD towers, the Steam tower. Worked fine for ages. Steam will only work with GNU tower. That's the only one it's going to have. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to swap over the dependency and make it happen. Now, in Serpent, we have variations on named providers where you can say, I depend on a binary or I depend on a sole name. So it depends on binary tar. That's simple. So I rebuilt libarchive to drop the tar link, and I rebuilt. So I added GNU tar, so that the only provider in the entire repo of user bin tar was GNU tar, unless you already had tar installed from libarchive, at which point there's the distinction. Well, it's already satisfied, so I don't need to go fetch an update. And that becomes a proper pain in the arse. And at that point, everyone's like, use a sat solver. No. Instead, we're gonna fix the problem.
Okay.
We're not interested in the theory behind the maths. We're gonna fix the problem. The problem is very, very simple. At any given point, whatever ends up on your system, really what you want is how it's represented in the final repository. That's it. You don't want any other distinction from that, because that's the way it's packaged. There shouldn't be a variation just because your system's fucking weird, right? And that's where a lot of bugs do come in when we get partial updates. So I've refreshed my repositories, I'll go and install a package, it sees the new version of the package, it pulls that one in instead of all the upgrades I also needed, and fucking system host. We've all been there, it's horrible. So we said, we're not going to allow that anymore. There is no concept anymore of what is installed. There is only what your system model says should be present in a newly computed transaction. Because we realised we didn't need to remember what was already in anyway, because it's fucking nonsense. That was the last stage. That's yesterday's news. We're producing an entirely new version of the operating system locally every time you do any operation. So why do we need to remember the old dependencies? Why do we need to remember all of the transitive steps? It makes absolutely no fucking sense at all. We're just reproducing it. So if you look at the simplest terms, imagine it was like, God forbid, a YAML file. We got to keep that industry going.
Not a fan.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're using them at the moment, but we are going to switch to Cuddle, because it's actually a lot nicer. We've been speaking with Kat, one of the devs as well. We've got a bit of a plan going on there, and it's just nicer. It's just nicer. Tagging things is pretty. YAML can literally die in the fire. So imagine you have this file of lines where each line is separated by /r/n. There is no YAML. Every line says, this is a name that I want to install, or this is a package I want to install, blah, blah, blah. It would just recompute the entire dependency graph for a new OS install, new transaction. That solves all of the weird dependency issues. If you don't need anything anymore, it's no longer pulled in. It doesn't matter. We can garbage collect it because we delete the old states, and then we decrease the reference to the states on disk. Where it gets really, really interesting in that, because if you shared that model and the repository configuration, you can reproduce it on another system. And where it gets more interesting again is we've got something called version repos coming up. So long story short, remember I said earlier on, you will only update to the latest supported version of MOS. That's the package manager, right? So let's say we got version 1 of the repo, and it needs version 1 of MOS. And then sometime in the future there was like a version 4, and that needed a certain version, blah, 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 blah.
Sure. The
way that we're going to do it, we're not going to go back in time and fix an old release. Every time, what we're going to do, we're going to create a new snapshot of the repo, that's immutable. And that has that version working of MOS. So from your local client, you can only see that version. It's never going to change. The upgrade path is never going to change forward. Now, if you link that, one, that protects us forever because we can keep upgrading. It's just not going to break. It's just the way it is. If you then link that with the model idea, you could actually export a lock file which references those unique versions that you had at that particular time and exactly reproduce that installed somewhere else. Because you've locked to those versions. Yeah, so you kind of get like cargo locks for an OS at that point. That starts to get a little bit sexy. Then we thought on it a little bit further, and we thought, okay, we kind of have this problem with co-installability, which is a bitch, which normally is solved by having conflicts between packages, which is messy, really. And then we've all suffered update alternatives for years, which is it's also kind of messy, really. Then we've realised again, why would we update any symlinks? We're producing the entire fucking file system every single time. It makes no sense. So then we thought, well, what if we had a way to augment the dependencies with a path, like a named subscription? So that if I say for Clang, my name subscription is 18.
Mm-hmm.
By overriding that bit of dependency management, the path that it follows. So if you imagine Clang was actually a virtual package, it's not a real package anymore. It says, I depend on Clang 18 when it says 18. But I default to 19. So I have 18, 19, blah, 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 whatever. We have the default values baked into the distro. You'll always get the right version. But by overriding and matching to the paths that are exported, your system is composed based on your preference. So that the right Clang is activated because you said you wanted it. Or if you had, say, Python dependencies and you need the 3.11 versions or 3.9 version, the dependency path is met, that's all that you end up subscribed to and installed on disk. If you had two different versions of Steam and one conflicts with the other, it wouldn't matter because the dependency graph itself becomes atomic. And that's where it gets a little bit crazy. Because you produce an entire version of the operating system every time locally, very, very quickly, you don't have to worry about where the paths are going to be ahead of time because it either works or it doesn't. Which means you can have update alternatives baked into the operating system at the package level. And you can locally say, well, in my package build, this is not working with the Rust version of Core Utils. So for my build, I actually need the GNU flavor, so I'm going to depend on GNU, and I'm going to tag it with the GNU one. So you're still saying I need binary ls, for example, as your dependency. You're not saying I need GNU Core Utils. But you might tag that binary ls and say, I need the GNU version of that, because we know that's a dependency. So for that build, it would build using that. On your local system, you might be using the default, which is the Rust version. But if you had problems with it, you could override that and all of a sudden you've got the GNU one coming in because you're using the capabilities rather than the package names. And that's the distinction. Nobody should care about the package names. They're boring, they're uninteresting. They're just basically slots on a database. Nobody gives a shit. But if you say, like, I need user bin rm, well, that makes sense. You know, or if I need a certain sol name, like libc.sol.1 x8664, I don't care if it comes from zlib or Cloudflare zlib or Bob's Warehouse zlib or whatever, you know, or rewrite it in Rust zlib. I don't care. I just need zlib. But I need a way to override it when it makes sense and also have that same default. So I'm not creating this absurd, you know, exponential test matrix. You still have the distro is built one way. But you still then get co-installable tool chains and the ability to change between them as you need. So when in MOS you don't have an upgrade, you have a sync, which should be very at home for the Pac-Man users among us. When we say sync, it's we don't care what's newer or older or that. I know that sounds absurd. It really does. But we literally don't care. We only care that the package is different. So the way that we build the graph is just, in theory, it's just a simple directed and cyclical graph, and then we topologically sort it. But that's actually built on top of a providers and dependency system, which is also built based on top of priority layered plugins, which is how one repo can be higher than another, but you can still have a leak from one to the other. So if this one has a name and this one has a name that's different, you know, one excludes the other, but this has a dependency that wasn't there, this one's seen. So it's that sort of idea. It allows it to have a lot of fucking powerful features at basically no cost, just by this basic concept of why don't we just reproduce the entire operating system every time we do a thing? And by making that cheap as chips, as I said, we went from every transaction being about 30 seconds now being a couple of seconds. On top of, you know, we're doing parallel decompression, we're using Z standard for all of our payloads. You know, we're parallel fetching things, so like you got like 8 packages downloading at a time, and you know. So it makes it frighteningly quick just to do a transaction, like to remove an or to add an or thing. And every transaction is just a free copy of the OS reproduced. And then icing on the cake. So let's say every one of your transactions is only taking up like a couple of megs on space because it's really the weight of the directory structure. Most of it's just hard links, so like what, 4K per node, yeah? Because we have that entire directory structure on disk still, you actually still have your last OS on disk every time you make a transaction. Just by the nature of how it works. So it came for free. We produced this, this deduplicated shallow copy of the operating system every time. It's like having all these Git shallow codes on disk at different tags, yeah? We can now just boot back into the last one. It's that simple. Like, you just swap the user tree again, that exchange mechanism I spoke of earlier on. We just swap for the older one. Instead of swapping for the staging one, we say, no, actually, I want 192. I'm just going to swap back for him, and then boot. So we added that a little while back, and during Drake, basically, like, initRD, before everything is mounted, it finds your disk, Drake mounts your disk, puts it in place, and this was actually inspired by the way the OS tree guys had done it. Did have a look, but when it's mounted to /distro, it can see your operating system there. We've got MOS actually built inside the init RAM disk now. And then we just point it at the installation. It's like, yeah, can you just roll back the state? And it just swaps the directories over for us using the rename exchange. So it's an atomic rollback before we've ended early boot. So systemd hasn't even kicked in properly. We've got the initRD version of systemd. We haven't done the handover yet. Then it's handed over. Everything starts with the right links, the right files, the right version of the operating system, the right defaults. So it was really, really, really fucking cheap. I think it only adds now about just under 2 seconds in the delay. That's to do with some weird resolution thing with the rootfs. But long story short, free rollbacks, atomics is basically the way to do with everything. If we hadn't gone atomic first, we wouldn't have been able to solve these problems at all, to be honest.
Rollback's one of the things I think are really interesting about the distro, like those OS tree distros, and it's one of the things that has been kind of compelling about maybe trying them out, because, if there's like a broken package, there's a regression in something, whatever, anything like that, like being able to easily roll back like that is very, very nice, because you can roll back packages on a traditional distro like Arch, but that involves like using the package archives and installing old package versions, and maybe it's incompatible with your C library, then you have to roll that back as well, and it's just a big mess. So having a rollback system built into the OS, I think, like, it's not something you need to use often, but when you need it, it's very convenient to have.
Yeah, I don't know if you see the rather clickbaity demo of it I did the other day. The LTT test.
No, I don't think I saw that.
But I demonstrated it, and basically I removed glibc, lost the entire distro, rebooted back into the non-desktop, which is always fun. Because it was the last working transaction, because it's integrated with the blasphemy stuff. We have to produce working configurations based on the kernels that are present. Because the kernel is no longer present, we didn't produce a new boot entry. Therefore, you just automatically roll back into the old version. So it was like an accidental safeguard, because it couldn't produce a new entry. When it booted up, the old configuration entry was the only one on disk. So even though the disk was the mutated, broken state, the rollback happened automatically for me, like by accident, which was sexy. Not gonna lie, that was kind of cool. So yeah, all those little things where we've, like, gone absolutely not invented here, crazy. When they all come together, it is kind of useful, because there will be those times like testing the NVIDIA drivers. It's always NVIDIA drivers. One of the things people don't talk about, and they're saying, like, you can roll back this. Other distros always keep 3 kernels on disk and things like that, which they normally do. They don't. They don't. I can hold you for NVIDIA though.
Arch does not do
No,
that.
Arch does not.
No, it does not version
YOLO.
its kernels. It does not.
He just YOLO.
Yeah, Arch does not version the kernel it has installed on disk. Like, obviously the package version is installed, but the actual kernel on disk, they just replace it.
Edge.
Yeah. Well, this is why I say you should install a secondary kernel. Like, have the LTS kernel around, just in case something goes wrong.
Yeah. No, that doesn't make sense. That reminds me, we've got a sort of similar issue, and it's not really an issue, it's a solved problem without an implementation. So, at the moment, when you do an update to a kernel, again, it's going to be the same thing in Serpent, but not for the same reasons, because we've swapped over the file system. If it tries to load a new kernel module, it can't see that path anymore. We've got a fix coming for that because the old file system actually does still exist. That's the difference. It's just unreachable. So we're going to make Moss record the path of where it was ghosted, so that we can just patch kmod on the kernel and they'll be able to find it automatically. But because of that, we had to build FAT32 support directly into the kernel itself, because otherwise you can't mount your ESP.
Mm-hmm.
That was an interesting problem when that happened. And for the NVIDIA stuff, normally the kernels will roll forward. The NVIDIA is locked to the kernel tree. So then if you try and roll back, your NVIDIA is nearly always out of sync. So you've got to like redo that again. And if you're not using the AK mods on like Fedora, you've got to use the DKMS stuff. And your headers are out of sync as well. And it is a complete pain in the hole, to be quite honest. So being able to roll back with the drivers and kernel and file system sync as one, it's actually really, really handy, to be honest with you, because I've hosed too many installs to trust myself. I can build a distro, couldn't tell you how to use one.
Well, you did forget your mic driver, so maybe.
I know. I feel terrible. I'll fix it. It's on my list.
Okay. So right now, Serpent is in alpha.
Yeah.
So what is it that still needs to be done, and what would a first stable release of Serpent look like?
I'm going to be honest, I've got no interest in the first stable release. I'm milking it Gmail style. It's going to be alpha for like the next 10 years. It's going to be using that label so long, like people's going to get sick of it. It was originally called pre-alpha because it was like, no, seriously, don't use this. Your hard drive will explode.
Mm-hmm.
If assuming that the kernel supports it. If that happens, like if we remembered it in the KConfig, it's definitely going to be obliterated.
Mm-hmm.
To me, like it felt very, very early, very, very rough in the pre-alphas because it was, to be quite blunt. With the alpha series at the moment, only really looking at one or two more alphas because a lot has changed. So we deliberately focused on basically mostly the GNOME desktop, making that work well and the operating system around it before we start expanding the repo.
Mm-hmm.
We have got roadmaps of things that we want done, but what we're trying to do is decouple the ISO versioning from the rest of the OS. So there's never going to be a 1 point anything. There's going to be the 0 point series, and then we're going to start at 2 because I'm a massive troll. Semantic versioning just fucks my head like completely. So I was like, I'm going to have some weird kind of timestamp type thingy that's also linked to the MOS format version, which I also made version 0. And I thought, I don't want to give any sort of stability ideas around the version of because I've worked with a Mozilla codebase for way too fucking long. So I decided I was going to just like bump straight to version 2.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who
there's never going to be a 1.
Yeah. Well, but, look, I like the way the kernel does versioning, which is when the number is too big and Linus doesn't have enough fingers left, he just bumps the number.
Yeah. 7. To be fair, like the 2.6 days were long.
Yeah, they were. What was it like?
That was unnecessarily
7-8 years,
long.
some stupid amount of time.
And then I remember going from the 2.4 to the 2.6. I was on Slackware back then. I bricked Lilo. HDA got absorbed into Libada, so it was SDA 1 on reboot, except I didn't make it that far because I couldn't find my hard drive anymore. Then I reinstalled Grub and then it ate it.
My favorite part about the 2.6 era is it was so long that some stupid developers decided to build in expectations the kernel would be on 2.6 into their code, and some software actually did break when they moved off of it.
Nice. Kind of reminds me of all the checks that I had for Windows. If the version number started with 9, that'll work.
God, Linux. I'm relatively new to it, but I've been using Linux for like 4 or 5 years at this point. But like, I really do enjoy going back and like looking at some of the early history that's happened in this space because whilst not everything has been archived, a lot of it has, and there's a lot of really early discussions you can go back and see, and just see that, you know, nobody's ever known what they were doing.
No, never. I think this is the world's longest demonstration of the phrase, couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery. Nobody's cracked it yet, like literally nobody.
It's, look, you know, things are somewhat more organised than they used to be, but, you know... yeah, you know firsthand. No.
I've just embraced it all now, the way because the Linux world has changed a lot in the last few days. I can still remember, I wouldn't say fondly, but I can still remember like using Barrel pre-Compass days. And I had the Marine RGBA theme. You know, if your screen wasn't a rotating fish tank, there was something chronically wrong with your head. You know, like that's the way it had to be. You had to manually patch Broadcom. To be fair, that's still not fucking changed. Like, Broadcom does not get any better since even then. And yeah, you had to change your run level if you wanted to install the NVIDIA drivers. This is like pre-fucking System D, pre-Upstart as well. You know, back to run level 3. Build drivers if they worked and if they installed, and depending if you was using the right distribution of Xorg versus X11, that it might work, and then you could actually change your init tab to go back to run level 5 and hope the fuck it actually came back online.
So do you always...
biggest...
sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was going to say, so do you always find it kind of funny when people say that Linux is hard to use now? You know, coming from how long you've been using it for and the state it was in when you were using it then, like, you'll still see people now be like, oh, well, Linux is hard to use, I have to open a terminal sometimes. And it's just like, what, like once a week?
I still remember, and this has gone back a while, even before like the prominent KDE 3.5 days, before then, when you had a choice of options in GNOME, which were basically all of the ClearLux things, and you had the ugly, horrific I think this was Fedora Core back then. It was FC. Wasn't even Fedora. I think it was Fedora Core back then. I can still remember the little horrific, ugly little bastard terminal windows with the little blue bars on them. People say things have got harder. They haven't. Like, we've got working font support for one. I don't know if anyone remembers, but if you wanted to have anti-aliasing actually working in fonts a few years ago, or subpixel rendering, you had to go and patch FreeType. That was normal. Like,
yeah.
Patents have expired. Like, we had to do it in Solus a few years back. You had to install an additional sub package which could be removed if you was like encumbering patents. You couldn't do MP3s because of the patent. You'd have to have libDVD CSS if you wanted to watch the fucking DVD and then hope that it did work. And if you had any of the Oaktech media drives, then you were screwed because you couldn't find DevSR0. And I remember all the pains. And now I can just stick a USB into my laptop and then Fedora say, nope, I'm not reading it. I've got USB guard.
Well, that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
But, like, you know, even just in the time that I've been using Linux, things have gotten simpler. You don't, like, realistically now, you don't even have to use a terminal to install software. Like, even just that basic thing, most desktops and most distro bases have some sort of graphical tool to install all of your software, to update all of it, and it just works. Like, yes, if it goes wrong, it'll throw some weird esoteric message at you, which the way error messages are handled in the graphical tools can be done much better. Usually what it does is just takes the terminal output and just dump it there.
A critical error has occurred. Reason, a critical error. Far-libd package triggers.
Yeah. Or you have, well, my favorite example of things where like a new user is going to do something wrong is during the LTT Linux challenge where Linus nuked the entirety of Pop! OS. Because there was some issue where Steam relied on an older version. I think it relied on like an older version of GNU-C or something, and it had to roll back that, which caused every other package on the system to be rolled back, which deleted everything.
Why would you need it? Why would you even need it?
Look, it was the worst part about that is it was known about by Pop! OS like a month before that happened, and they just hadn't fixed it yet.
Awkward.
Yeah.
So, took the entire C library out. Most of the distro.
Yeah, just gone.
Made it memory safe.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Well, speaking of memory safety, when I was talking about Rust the other day, you mentioned to me that there was like a point where you didn't like Rust, and now if I look at the Serpent tooling, I'd be hard pressed to find stuff that wasn't written in Rust.
It was the evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't have a conversation without being told to rewrite it in Rust. Not even the conversation. You just got extremely fucking irritating, to be honest. Like, I got to a point where I just completely ignored people, and you started to hate the mention of Rust. And I think that happened to a lot of people, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they're in my comments.
Yeah, you should redo this in Rust, and it's like, yeah, no, I'm actually choosing Perl, because maintainability. But I just completely switched off to the idea, and I tried it a couple of times, and I couldn't get around the syntax. I think I once described it as a daddy long legs tap dancing through Inkwell or something like that. Like, it was absolutely fucking horrific. But then one day I decided to reflect on it during my my adventures in D-Lang. You know, you've got to a certain point with a programming language being niche where you're literally having to fucking port the compiler to the new version of LLVM. Like, that was a bit of a wake-up call. Yeah. This isn't my job. Well, definitely, I'm trying to build a distro over here to build my gaming engine. Do you remember? So I had another look around, and I did for about 5 or 6 months. I was doing this little comparison. I was saying what level you'd need to go to get similar output in terms of optimization. And it turned out that D was actually freakishly fast, even with a garbage collector. Astonishingly fast. Really, really productive, and the template and stuff was just fucking absurd. But there were problems. Garbage collection by default never sat easy with me, to be honest, because if at some point I need to be able to pivot to developing firmware or whatever, I need options. GC ain't gonna cut it there, and there was never enough traction against that. There wasn't enough of an ecosystem, it was too fragmented, says the serial distro dev. It would have taken more commitment than I was able to give. I would have been more time working on the language than the distro, and that's not something I want to do. So I thought, fuck it, I'll have another little look at Rust, and then I looked at the syntax again, I was like, and then I thought of something. The one thing that everyone's complaining about is just the syntax for the barrel checker. What baseline have you got to compare it with? Do you know what I mean? There's nothing to compare it with. And people can memory safety this, that, and the other, but it's realistically it is the only machine executable language that's not dependent on a GC or a VM that is memory safe. And that's the key differentiator. You know, like, alright, you might have your JVMs, you might have like Python. To a degree, there is memory safety, and not so much in concurrency and race conditions, but there is, in the non-dangly sense, there is some level of memory safety. But in terms of compile time and understood by machine. Rust is basically all there is in that class, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to compare it with in syntax. It doesn't exist. It was the first to do it. So at that point, I was like, okay, you kind of got to be fair. I was being too harsh on the language for something that it basically pioneered.
Sure.
So once I got past that and I realised, you can actually have some deleted lifetimes and a lot of things there, like when it's generic, it just got a lot easier by ignoring that. And then all of a sudden, I thought I'll give it a go. How hard can it be? And to be honest with you, once you do dive into Rust and you start ignoring, because you can go months without even encountering lifetime issues when you first start Rust, to be quite honest. Like in terms of the basic difference, you never get past the compiler. And even when you do run into compiler issue, it will actually give you a link. Here's a link to understand the issue. Here's the documentation. Here's the error code. Here's a little pointy character exactly where you fucked up.
Yeah.
And if that's not good enough, then when you're using the LSP I use Z. Most people use VS Code. But you will actually get the proper diagnostics. You get the relevant fixes, the refactoring opportunities. And on top of that, if you're using Copilot as well with so I use Cloud 3.5 because GPT-4 is just trash, to be honest. Just deletes half your file. Even though it's a little bit slower, the diagnostics are way fucking better. And it can work out the issues most of the time for you. So with that, and then how many crates are available, license compatible crates, I might say as well, rather than everything being fucking GPL. Because let's be honest, once you get to GPL, your options are limited. It's simple as that. I know people can say, but GPL is our savior. Not when it's GPL 3 and your fucking base is MPL 2, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, no, it is not. Because all of the Serpent stuff now is under MPL 2.
I did notice that. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been more of an MIT guy before. I've used elib for a few things as well. Apache 2 I used for a bit, but when I actually did my research because I was working at MZLA on Thunderbird for a while as well, and when I did my research, it's basically like, okay, well, what does MPL buy me over, say, using zlib or MIT or any kind of do what the fuck conditions? It basically comes down to patent protections. That's really what it is. And they kind of matter. So I decided I like the license and everything I do henceforth will be MPL. Which was great. Until there comes a point. So one of the design requirements for MOS is it eventually has to eliminate all dynamic linking. Because so name changes and upgrade our as we've all seen. libarchive Pac-Man, anyone remember that one? Big bada boom. So, depending on libuid or libblockid or whatever it is an absolute no-go. Because you would have to statically link them, which is fine, except they are LGPL 2.1, which basically elevates to GPL 2 when statically linking, which infects your entire fucking code base. So we couldn't do that. So we couldn't even use block ID. Even for partition management, people don't realise libparted is actually GPL3. It's not LGPL. GPL3. So any code that you are doing using libparted, hey, congrats, your entire set of artifacts are now GPL3. So that would have violated the license for our own code bases because we then use MOS and other components. Same for blasphemy. We use that in other bits and pieces. So it limited our options to the point we basically rewrote most of the functionality we needed from block ID and Rust anyway. In terms of identifying super blocks. Now that's what's led to the new Disks RS project, which is a little bit of a stupid pun as well. It's like Disks RS. So, but yeah, the idea there is provide the foundations, shared foundations for decent library code for doing disky type things, partition allocation strategies, super block identification, topology, all in one place. So if somebody does then want to go rewrite these daemons and libraries and Rust, there's the tools, go do it yourself. Again, Serpent OS is just the land of Lego. Patent not pending because MPL2.
So, okay, one of the things I did notice that kind of just, I don't know, it seems like an odd choice. The desktops that are currently supported on Serpent,
Why isn't that Plasma?
Well, yeah, it's GNOME and Cosmic. Look, I'm running KDE right now. My plan is to eventually move over to Cosmic when a couple of the issues that I have are resolved. This is, alpha software will be alpha software, basically. There's a couple of crashes that are very fun that I can, that I run into. Besides that, also some memory leaks, which are a bit of a problem, especially when you start using 70 gigabytes of memory. Yeah. Anyway, ignoring that part. Yeah, so GNOME and Cosmic are the desktop options you have right now.
Yep.
Why?
Fair question. No, purely because of my own Slack familiarity. That's it.
Fair.
I'm used to working with it. I can package it in my sleep, so it's just an easy thing to maintain while we're building the distro. For Cosmic, I like to bet on things. I want to see Cosmic go far.
Mm-hmm.
I know they got the work cut out from, but they're trying. And if I'm honest, if I'd started Budgie now, not them years ago, I would probably be doing something similar code-wise to what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it struck a chord with me. I don't know that I'd use Iced. I'd probably use Slint, if I'm completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
But it is what it is. I think they also had a similar internal discussion about what they wanted to use there.
Yeah, I believe I've talked to Jeremy about that. I don't know the reason why they ended up going with Iced instead of Slint.
I know Ice exposes more of the WinIt stuff, but I know in Slint, because looking through the code the last few days, you can do your own platform provider stuff. Someone I actually wrote their own compositor with Slint, didn't they? It's a paper one. It uses its own custom protocol. But long story short, it works on the same sort of premise for the Qt quick declarative stuff, where you just have a shared buffer in OpenGL and you can just transfer it between things, which is basically how the NVIDIA works. So you can, even in Slint, you can provide a native image and then just render it in any which way. So that's how all integrations, which means in terms of Wayland, that basically means everything, because everything is just a surface and a buffer. Having that option available means, even though there's not a great choice of widgets in there at the moment, they've got all the access kit stuff in there that I was looking at. There's a few backends. They have a Qt5 backend for some reason. I don't even. But one of the really cool things I saw, which I'm planning to use, not gonna lie, they have a Linux KMS backend in Slim.
Okay.
Which means you don't need a display stack. Now, wouldn't that be nice for an installer I saw? A graphical, actually fucking minimal network installer that only has the essentials, not the entire fucking desktop environment. That triggers me. I hate having to ship an entire fucking desktop environment for nobody to use it. Because it's using System D, it's using Draco, which means it's using OverlayFS, which is not AUFS, it's not UniFS. Which means if you touch more than 30 files, it just fucking shit the bed.
I get it.
I
get it as an option if you want to test out the distro, right? That's neat, sure. Or if there's some issue and you need some Linux environment to fix some, I don't know, you forgot your root password, you want to go reset that, whatever, anything like that.
And then it was bin bash.
Yeah, or you could do that. That is
security.
Yeah. Well, that's what I do. But or any other. You have a disk issue. You want to, for whatever reason, your root is not being mounted, and you want to go and fix that. Whatever, anything like that. You got a UUID wrong when you set things up. Anyway, that's nice to have as an option. However, it would also be nice to not download a 10 gigabyte ISO to install a distro.
Yeah. It's just such a waste of space. To then update it immediately after it's installed. And that's the kicker of watching LibreOffice go past and the first set of updates knowing you will never fucking open it. And it gets to the point, every time the set of updates go past, you've still got it installed because you're scared to remove it in case you end up needing it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're just wasting all that data for downloading. But yeah, I mean, even our installer is a network installer. There's literally no point in the desktop being there at all. So being able to support that in future, having an actual just network installer that's also graphical, also pretty, that I'd be looking forward to. I've been doing a bit of research work in the installer department.
Sure, because you can always do like a TUI installer, but like the nice graphical installer is, it's nice to have that.
It's got it. It's kind of, yeah. I mean, I've been doing some experiments with it. It is actually nice to work with. I found it really, really easy to work with. Like the little Slint files, they're not hard to figure out. You just whack up a window on the other monitor, or just put always on top of it. It live updates the file. The callbacks are done in a way that's really easy to access from the raw stuff, as long as you're willing to accept that the main process is owned by the Slint environment, which you kind of should do anyway because it's the main thread. It gives you callback mechanisms and global functions that you can back and just pass everything across as data models. When you really start to think about it, that's the way it kind of should work. If you think about any, because I've done a lot of GTK work over the years, manually controlling all of the threads and synchronization main loop seems wrong. But that's the way most toolkits already work. Whereas the way that, from what I've seen from Slint the last few days, you've got your UI files, and you're given your UI-based logic and presentation only. There's no way to have real business logic in there because you've got to define your interface points, which are your callbacks and your global functions or global structs. But that basically means that your main entry to your application, your GUI application, is just like, hey, here's this thing. Give me an app window out of it, and I'll do something with it, which is basically hook into all of the callbacks. The only options you have there is to put something back on Slint's event queue, back on its main thread to pipe it back into it. Otherwise, you can't get into it. It becomes a sealed little world.
Did I DC again? What is Discord doing today? Did I DC? Did he DC? Someone DC'd. Oh! Hello?
Still there, yeah.
Yeah, Discord's doing Discord things today. It's fine. We already had it happen twice, which is fine. Yes. I'm not sure exactly where things cut off.
Slint good, ice bad.
Fair? Yeah. Yeah, fair. I don't know. The whole Rust GUI scene is relatively new anyway. It a couple of years back, there wasn't really... There just wasn't really anything reasonable to use. There were like little experiments here and there, but the fact that you can build a desktop...
Nothing serious.
Yeah, the fact that you can build a desktop in Rust now, that's a relatively new idea.
I mean, that's cool. That's cool and all. Don't let me piss on their parade. A new demo was added to Slint Codebase about 3 weeks ago for the UEFI target. I booted it up earlier on in Chrome. You can literally build a functional GUI app in Slint as an EFI executable.
Okay.
Graphical and pretty and stuff. I was like, what? So now, I've been trying desperately hard not to run down and write a new bootloader to give us all back graphical that we were so fucking terribly robbed of. And then, my brain was like, well, with this Linux came as backend with Slint, couldn't we have something that's slightly better than Plymouth? Have a really, really fucking proper, beautiful boot splash instead of that one little fucking spinner that everyone's seen next to the framework logo for the last 4 years. Have something actually pretty. So these things coming about, I'm excited about. It sounds stupid. But I've not been excited about Linux graphical stuff in a long. But there's opportunities now actually starting to open up and start to have cool shit again. And as far as I know, somebody's already trying to do the bootloader stuff.
Okay.
In the Linux OS circles.
Mm-hmm. That's
so
cool.
That'd be kind of cool. That would be kind of cool. But yeah, can you imagine like an actual pretty fucking bootloader?
That would be,
like,
yeah.
Actual menus that are categorized, like, but still compatible with the system deboot stuff like that would just be. I'd love that. I really would. Instead of having this ugly, just fucking menu structure, just give me a pretty boot back.
Yeah, I agree.
Sick of looking at that OEM logo. I'm just done with it.
Yeah.
And then something crashes and it bleeds through again. It's like, oh. I want to go back to the old days of Pretty Linux because we just settled. Really.
It's too professional looking. You know, I like fun.
Yeah.
It's flat and professional.
Like we're. Yeah, I mean, I basically come from the world of UX theme multi-patcher. So, like, if I ain't getting a pirate boot splash on this, nobody's having that. So, those are good old days. Windows XP pirated it.
So, what sort of, I guess, interest have you seen with what you're doing with Serpent? Like, it's been around for a while. I know Phoronix, Phoronix covers everything, so there's been plenty of articles from them, but from like what you've seen, like what sort of interest has there been in the project?
I think most people are interested in me shutting up and stopping. There's this growing hope that I just fucking give up and fuck off. But that's also not happened. So, like, I think in the last 6 months or so, everyone started to realize I'm not really going anywhere. So that I having to start to tolerate the existence of Serpent and now incorporate some ideas into their process, which is, marks as success and such. There's been more engagement behind the scenes than you would expect.
Okay.
If I'm honest. The people that are interested in it now, by and large, are well-known developers, especially in Rust circles as well. We seem to have been lucky enough to have an influx of very talented developers. We've also recently been graced with a few, I would say, more gaming-oriented folks as well. Luke Jones is the Asus Linux guy. He does the ASUSD stuff. He's recently joined our channels as well. And we've enjoyed having him there, and we've been working together to get his patches working on Serpent because we use Clang, not GCC, for our kernels. We use Clang by default for everything. So it's attracting more technical largely at the moment, even though I aim for out of box usable experience. But yeah, by and large, we're more technical, more capable people who are they're looking to challenge the status quo, I think, without having realised it before. I think before there wasn't really the need to challenge the status quo, I think in a way we all accepted it, and that, I should say, that the professional field just sort of emanated out across the land, and we all said, whatever, this is the way things are now. I'll be spoon-fed my own desktop and all my RPMs, and that'll be that. And that was the way of the world. And then I think maybe it's an excuse for the rebellious. I think that's really what Serpent represents. It is an excuse for the rebellious. It's a chance to disrupt, and I think it's attracting those that are capable of doing that disruption. Because we're kind of tearing the rule book up in a certain way as well. Not drastically, but like ejecting things out of the code base just because we fucking feel like it is very refreshing. Like adopting the Rust alternatives before basically anyone.
Yeah, I did see
So
one of the discussions on the GitHub about UUtils.
yeah, we use uutils, we use ntpd rs, we use sudo rs. We don't use the upstream sudo. Yeah, there's a few bits like there was this whole world of rewrite it in Rust, and
Mm.
I had my own world not invented there. I was like, fuck it, what if they had a baby? And that baby is a snake. So, but yeah, it represents different things to different people. The way I've always explained it to people. Has anyone ever thought about why they're using Linux, why they're involved in Linux community? No, I don't think most people do.
Mm.
It is that community part of it. People need purpose, people need to find a shared social setting to do so. Linux is something that represents a chance for that. Most of us are looking for a church of some description, but have no way to describe it. We have nothing, no reference point. But by and large, that's what these distros and communities are. They're refuges and churches for the similar-minded to work and affect change. And while I'm not saying that we're touting religion here over Serpent, especially with our Eden imagery, I don't think it'd be appropriate. It is a chance for affecting technical-driven changes for once. Because as you said yourself before, a lot of projects are primarily the execution, not the delivery. I think really, if we're being quite honest, this is one of the first time in a long time that the trend has been bucked and said, you know what, we're going all fucking in on the engineering, whole new set of tooling that's going to be like to industrial fucking scale. And we're going to plan the entire pipeline with the architecture format, like for an entire new Linux distribution, and it's going to evolve forever, and we're going to continuously replace all the bits. And the basic workflow is if somebody wants something in, send us a pull request on GitHub. If we approve it, the pipeline takes over, and the build turns up a couple of minutes later for everyone. That's kind of the way it should be. We've modernized it and we've made it open and accessible to everyone to do what they want with building. And in terms of the core distro experience itself, we take the contributions. But again, I would really love it at some point if people made their own projects, their own distros, their own downstreams based on it. Because to deliver a product, you don't need 30,000 packages. You need a shared foundry of recipes that everyone can pull, everyone can use to make their deliverables. And that's what it is giving them the tooling, giving the quality recipes, giving all of those integration points, that 10-mile down the road view that developed it all together. And just let everyone go fucking nuts with it. It's the weirdest version of organized chaos.
Well, it's giving
because
sorry, go on.
It's just normally, like anarchy is in the moment also, but I guess it's sort of a freedom thing as well, isn't it, really? Giving folks the ability to liberate themselves. Let's be honest, when it comes to solving these kinds of issues, you're looking at support contracts. It's only the industry that would be willing to solve these problems normally. So for whatever reason, SerpertOS has decided to be an arsehole and come and solve it for everyone. So, some of the things we're going to do is not going to make us any friends in commercial circles, like live patching the kernels. That's going to piss off. But it's one of those things of why shouldn't we make it inaccessible to people? Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to build the patches ourselves, but if you want to run, we'll share the mechanism. Fuck it. And then you can just run your own updates to your systems from that. And, do you know what I mean? These are the things that should have been accessible. They're not. We are cut off from it. We, the masses that have been powering and driving Linux forward for years, are cut off from the essentials that we actually need. Because they're behind some sort of SLA or behind some license. Why can't we all have all the goodies and still have the classic Linux desktop user experience? Why can't we have both?
Well, I was going to say, it gives
cake
people...
can't eat it.
I was going to say, it gives people a chance who are interested in working on a distro to actually work on a distro and not just maintain packages. And that's
boring.
a lot, yeah. Fedora, Debian, all that stuff, like, yes, there's definitely work that happens on, like, the back end with their package management solutions, but most of the foundation, most of the groundwork is already there.
Yeah. And
But,
tooling is
yeah.
very much in the corporate department.
Mm.
It's not really, yes, you can make pull requests, and yes, you can become involved in it, but all of it is going to be very much in line with what the business partners need. That's just it. But isn't it just nice, like, for once, to be able to make something that's good just because we fucking want to, not because we need to satisfy shareholders.
Yeah,
let's just make good stuff. And like, I agree on the packaging thing. Like, really, nobody builds a distro because they want to package. Nobody. It doesn't matter how good you make your format. Nobody wants to do it. Just nobody. So like, we're trying to automate the shit out as much as we can. So one of the features we had in the old version of Boulder, that's the package builder, it's long been gone, but is our own Joey's working on it at the moment. Automatic license detection by scanning like the matching files in the code base. That's something that's coming back. But there's other things we can do as well, which is a little bit similar to like what AutoSpec and Linux does. Basically, pattern match the build log. If you see something matching, just like whack it back into the build dependency, run it again. You know, there's no issue of unaccounted files because like Boulder will automatically generate sub packages based on pattern matching. You don't have to tell it every file that's going to be in there. It will tell you, which is kind of how it should be. Then we have manifests that we can discover all of the installed assets. We want to make it like it's an absolute piece of piss to package and update anything, and then automate that as well. So we have automation in terms of detecting the updates being available upstream, using release monitoring, but we're going to use more data sources, and then once that's done, you know yourself, it's going to be bots that are opening pull requests on GitHub, and it's like, yeah, it looks good, approve it. If it blows up, revert it, fuck it, whatever, you know, YOLO. Then do the testing. Like, we can just do the VM image testing, and it shouldn't be anyone manually writing recipes. That's great for getting the thing started, but in terms of updating it, nobody wants to do that. You know, like, it should be like, yes, integrate DevOps processes, but the distribution should not be DevOps designed. And I think that is also another key difference as well. Again, it probably sounds snobby, but it's just the harsh reality. SerpertOS is engineering. That, in a nutshell, it's engineering first, and then it's pragmatic second. You know, and that's where everything stems from. Because had it been DevOps first, then we would probably be cloud native too.
You really are not a fan of the. You're not a fan of that, are you?
It's just there's ways of solving problems. I strongly disagree with generically applying one tool to everything. Like, at no point has it ever occurred to me to use a screwdriver to butter my toast.
Fair. Yeah.
There's a lot of screwdriver toast out there. There is, though. Like, horses for courses, but like, I don't need to understand Docker to use fucking Steam.
Yeah. No, I get it. I definitely get it.
Like, they're just completely different problem domains. The context, it just, what? Fuck off. No. I just can't. I can't do it. I can't keep the pretense and the bullshit going. Docker files and Steam, they're not even related. Like, not even third cousins. It makes no sense. So I can't do it anymore. So I'm not going to be employed for the next 7 years anyway after this interview. So do donate. I'm going to need it.
Well, on that note, I guess we can, sign off there. Where can people find you, find Serpent OS, and get involved with the project?
Before or after the legal action?
Well, hey, look, you got OS in the name, so hey, maybe they'll come after you now.
Well, as soon as I get back to Ireland, then we won't worry about that. But for the minute, just don't tell anyone where I'm staying, right? That's why I've even turned the screen around. You can't see out the window, no pints around. I'm not getting AI out of this. You can go to SerpertOS.com for what appears to be a functional project website. which you will swiftly discover as a pile of shite, doesn't sufficiently describe the website, lacks documentation and even up-to-date screenshots. We have no, I don't even want to mention it. We even removed it from the social media link. We were ashamed of it. Okay, well, we've got Mastodon.
Okay.
We're over on the Fastodon Fastodon instance.
Yes.
Those words don't work well together. We're on Blue Sky. We are supposed to be updating the name because people keep telling us you can make it at serpertos.com.
Yeah, you can just like what is it? Like the I'm not a networking guy. There's like a record.
Yeah,
on
not
the server you can
DevOps.
update.
Like
Yeah. It's like it'll take you like 5 minutes to change. It's like a string you just attach.
I know,
to the
but then I've got to install like OpenTofu again on my laptop and like Linux Foundation vibes and shit. Like
fair enough.
Because we've got like this whole IAC project for maintaining all the DNS stuff and that, which is all really great, but didn't we invent dashboards a couple of years ago so the incapable like me could do this? Like, where we just log in and just like add an entry. Yeah, so that's the main place really, to be honest with you. Like, yeah, alright, social media. We're on Matrix, assuming you can get on at a point that it hasn't been overloaded. We are on the Matrix.org home server in the Serpent OS space, and the main thing is really just to go to our GitHub where like all of the shit actually happens. So it's github.com/serpent-os. The main project there is tools. I realise that may have entirely destroyed our SEO opportunity. But it's probably a good representation of what the industry is calling us. So, hey ho. Be true to yourself. That's the unified repo for Moss and Boulder. There's the recipes repo, which is basically all things packaging. There's use your web browser, go look. There's stuff there.
I got the
You'll
page
find
open.
something
Yeah,
cool there.
I'll link in the description.
Yeah. There's some interesting projects there, like the Discs RS stuff and what do I call it? Distro. Distro is a little toy project we got going there. If you can go run it, you'll see it's actually kind of pretty. It's just like a little disk management toy, but that's to build out the disk management library, which is just rusty, good. Very safe.
Yeah. Nothing else you want to mention? Is that pretty much it?
I've 4 kids and a bad arm and no job. Give me money.
Okay, we'll do my outro and then we'll end it off there. So, my main channel, Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. There will be a Serpent OS stream eventually when I get around to it. I said I was going to do it. I keep not doing it. Maybe it'll be done by the time this comes out. We'll see. I've got my gaming channel, Brody on Games. I stream there twice a week. Right now, I'm playing through... Good question, actually, when this comes out. 9 Souls I'll probably still be playing, and I'll probably be playing Ender Magnolia. Also, there's a React channel. I upload clips from the stream there, so check that out if you want to do that. If you're watching the audio version... Oh, if you're watching the video version of this, you can find the audio version on pretty much every podcast platform. It's on Spotify. There is an RSS feed. Search Tech Over Tea and you will find it. If you'd like to find the video version, it is on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. What do you want to say to end off the show? I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing that I'll say is, like we're bringing this very, very serious endeavor to an end here. What will release first? The stable version of Serpent OS or your live stream of you using
Well, we'll see how that goes.
Awkward.